And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are Commander decks that I took apart for unexpected reasons. And this is a little bit of a weird video. I know, why would I be talking about this, right? It's a bit of a cautionary tale. I was actually doing my Kaldheim retrospective and thinking about all the decks that I had made in Kaldheim. I made a ton. A lot for my channel, but also some for me. And then I started thinking about other decks that I had and took apart that I actually kind of liked, right? So all of the decks that I'm talking about here, obviously there's a ton of decks that I made, didn't really like it, so I took it apart. All these decks were decks that I actually liked and enjoyed, but took apart anyway, okay? And I've already made a video about 5 decks that I never lost with, and I took all those decks apart, and there's sort of a cautionary tale there, or a lesson of the day sort of situation. This is a different group. Those decks I took apart because I just thought they were too powerful for casual Commander, even though they were enjoyable. These decks I took apart for unexpected reasons, not all the same. They were all a little bit different reasons. Decks that I really liked, but I took them apart because I just felt like I couldn't play them in a casual game. So we're going to start out with Atheros Shroud Veiled. 4 white, black, legendary enchantment creature, God. Indestructible. As long as your devotion to white and black is less than 7, Atheros isn't a creature. At the beginning of your end step, put a coin counter on another target creature. Whenever a creature with a coin counter on it dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. So when I first saw this commander, I thought, man, that's neat for a blink strategy. And I thought I wanted to make a white-black blink strategy. You don't normally see that in white and black. And I thought this was a good option where I could put the coin counter on my creature. And then if it dies, it'll come back into play, right? Obviously, there's lots of ways you can do that. So it sort of was an aristocrat strategy as well. I was doing both at the same time. The problem is, and this is the unexpected part, the wording here is at the beginning of your end step, put a coin counter on another target creature. So you can put it on your opponent's creatures, and then when it dies, you gain control of them. So a lot of people built this deck, and this is, I didn't think of that. I thought of it, but I didn't think that was a great way to go about it. A lot of people like that strategy, so a lot of people did that. So right away when I started playing this deck, I started running into issues where people are just, I'm becoming the arch enemy because people just don't want their stuff stolen. And that is, again, when I talk about this in my, what strategy do you hate most video, I talk about certain strategies that are just really, really hated, but almost in an irrational way. Stealing people's stuff, people really just don't like having their stuff stolen. It's same. Mill's another one. I don't think milling is a great strategy in the format. It's definitely not very threatening or powerful, but people hate it. They just hate having their stuff milled. There's just something about watching that stuff go into the graveyard. You're like, oh, I really wanted that card. How dare you? And the milling player ends up getting killed or targeted really easily. And stealing is another one. Stealing your opponent's stuff it's okay. It's not stacks. It's not mass land destruction. It's not like it's not like nonstop counter spells. Like that stuff makes sense that people really, really hate it. Stealing your opponent's stuff is sort of an irrational hate. People it just really rubs them the wrong way. I get it. I totally understand. I don't love it either. It's just, it's a little bit irrational. And so for that reason, playing this deck, people are like, oh, he's going to steal my stuff. Get him, get his commander off the table or it's not fun to be the arch enemy. It's not fun when your opponents are trying to constantly get your commander off the table. That just doesn't make for an enjoyable game. So I took it apart for that reason. Similarly, my Lord of Tressorhorn deck, and Lord of Tressorhorn is a fond card for me because I remember cracking this open in packs back in the day, and it's just such one of those cards that when you see it, you're like, whoa, what is going on? It's just very unique. 1 black, red, and blue legendary creature, zombie 10/4. Okay, and back in the day, having a creature with a 10 power was a big deal. Big deal. That's a 2-hit kill, right? In a 60 card format. So that's a big deal. Also has play a black and regenerate it, so that's also really good. Regenerate, I think, is a really underrated ability. And however, when it enters the battlefield, you have to lose 2 life. You sacrifice 2 creatures and target opponent draws 2 cards. So that's the part you got to build around. That to me is what makes the deck an interesting deck. And I really, early in the days of playing Commander, I'm like, yeah, there's a card that I just loved back in the day. I'm going to make a deck with that. And, a lot of people have gone different ways with this commander, and I might revisit this. I don't know. But what I thought, and a lot of people just do the torpor orb thing. I torpor orb, so the ETB of my commander does nothing. It's like I just play a 4 mana 10/4 with regenerate and has no downside. That definitely is a way you can go about it. I thought it would be interesting to steal my opponent's creatures, right? So I steal my opponent's creatures, then I cast my commander, and I sacrifice the creatures that I stole. I thought that was an interesting, and I really went heavy down that theme. In fact, to the point where I wasn't really using my commander that much. My commander became sort of the win con in that deck, where eventually I would get my commander down and close out the game with it. And it was a steal permanent theme. I've talked about this deck a few times on my channel before. I'm stealing permanents and sacrificing permanents. So if, for example, Grixis doesn't deal with enchantments very well, so I would steal my opponent's enchantments with like a Word of Seizing or something that steals permanents, and then I would sacrifice it to my Infernal Tribute. You know, some of the effects that I had that could sacrifice anything, not just creatures. And I had lots of those effects in there. And then on top of that, I would put like a Hatching Plans in the deck so that I could sacrifice my own enchantments and draw cards of them, right? I had Read the Ruins in there, right? Lots of sacrifice permanent effects. So it didn't matter what I was stealing from my opponent. I could sacrifice anything, right? And again, I mean, just describing this deck, there's probably a lot of people out there that are like, oh, boy, that would annoy the crap out of me. And you're right, it would. It would definitely annoy. I get it. I totally get it. And even though it was a really fun, interesting deck, and I like playing it, constantly stealing your opponent's stuff and then sacrificing it is such a slap in the face, and I totally get it. Again, this is decks I took apart for unexpected reasons, and you know, this was early in my days of playing Commander, and this deck, I didn't understand that stealing all your opponent's stuff and sacrificing it would really annoy people, so I took it apart for that reason. Although, again, I might revisit this. I might revisit this guy, because I would just have to go a different way about it, because stealing people's stuff, they don't like it. Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle, 3 and a white, bird cleric 2/2 with flying. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So now we're in a completely different category here. And this deck, again, I love value decks, value commanders. I also like mono white. So this was just a no-brainer for me right out of the gate. I also really like the art. And I went with I thought, okay, well, if 90% of the cards in my deck are both historic and a mana value 3 or less creature, man, that's going to, like, the synergy there is fantastic. So you have great synergy, great value. That's the kind of stuff I love in deck, in Commander. And so very heavy artifact theme, right? Because artifact cards are historic. Also legendary, right? Lots of legendary, like Lieutenant Kirtar, for example. That's a 3 mana value creature that is historic, so I can play it, trigger my commander, get something out of the graveyard, then I can sacrifice my Lieutenant Kirtar and then get it back later because now it's in the graveyard and I get it back, obviously. So that was the deck. Lots of value. It was fun. I had tons of fun with it. The problem became, and this wasn't originally. Originally, I had this deck for a while. Played it like a dozen times. And then this commander became, not my deck, but this commander became a combo commander. People started figuring out there's lots of different combos you could do with it. And once it became a combo commander, what do, right? You can rule 0 and explain to people right out of the gate that you don't have any combos. But at the time I was only playing with randos online, so there wasn't really. I mean, I could do that, but they don't have to. It really didn't matter. I find that any of the combo-y commanders, like Gave Guru Spores is another one, where you can make a really fun, interesting deck with it, but there's so many combos that people, even if you tell them you don't have the combos, it seems to not help that much. They still target you just out of instinct almost, right? So this is a deck that I took apart, even though I really did enjoy it, just because it is not enjoyable. Again, people are like, why would you take a deck apart if you're enjoying it? Because it's not enjoyable going into a game, and I almost never won with this deck, and towards the end, I was often the first one out of the game because people are just too worried about maybe he's got a combo, maybe even the value thing, the constant getting stuff back from my graveyard. People are like, oh, we better put a stop to this fast, even though I wasn't very threatening. It was essentially a white weenie deck. So it's sad, but that's just the way it is. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that had fun, interesting decks that either they took apart or they just never play it because, everyone just hates on that commander so much. And again, there's a lesson to be learned from all of this. I'm not just talking about this because these are decks that I'm sad I don't play anymore. Moving on to the next commander, Tyam, Luminous Enigma. And again, another commander that when I saw it, I was just like, oh man, there's so many neat things you can do there, right? 1 white, black, green, Nightmare Beast. 3/3. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional vigilance counter on it. So right away, there's probably a lot you can do with that. I suppose you could even do Vigilance Tribal if you wanted to. But more importantly, pay 3 and remove 3 counters from among creatures you control, mill 3 cards, then return a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And that ability just opens you up for so many things to do here, especially the fact that it is a permanent card. So you can get back enchantments, artifacts, lots of different stuff. Obviously, there was a ton of great commanders from Ikoria. This is the one that I first gravitated towards. Really, really thought this was interesting to build around. Made a deck pretty quickly with it and pretty quickly took it apart, right? Because again, just like with Tashar, there was the combos. And there's a couple, I think, I think Devoted Druid maybe, and there's some other, and I had Devoted Druid in my deck. I don't think I had any infinite combo with it, but again, everyone was so scared of the combo that it just becomes that deck, and now I can't really play my deck because I become a target every single game. Again, even if you rule 0 and let everyone know you don't have any combos, it still, I think, is in the back of people's heads that, hey, that's a powerful, very threatening commander. They again, a little bit of irrational. They're more afraid of that commander than maybe they should be just because of the combo potential, even if it doesn't exist in your deck, right? So ended up taking that one apart pretty quickly. And again, Safies Daughter, another commander that unexpected because the combo potential that I didn't even know existed. Again, this was another one that very early, this was my first year playing commander that I ended up putting this one together. White and a green, a human scout, 2/2. Sacrifice Safies Daughter, return target creature. Put into your graveyard this turn to the battlefield. Very interesting ability. Sacrificing your own commander is a very interesting, And what I ended up doing is what I call reverse ETB. I love ETB strategies, blink strategies. I did a reverse ETB here where I have like a Causally Pride Mage, for example. Sacrifice my Safies Daughter first, targeting the Causally Pride Mage, and then I sacrifice the Causally Pride Mage to destroy something, and then it comes back into play, right? So it's sort of a reverse blink, what I call it. It was a fantastic deck, and I did not lose a lot of games with it. Just super, super value-y. Very similar to my Tishana deck, I would say. It basically was a white-green version of my Tishana deck. That is part of the reason I took it apart. I thought, okay, even though I really like this deck, I already have decks that are doing similar things. However, once again, the combo potential made people really fear it. I started hearing a lot when a game started, oh, Safies Daughter, you got the combo in there. And the combo is with Revelark, because Revelark gets your Safi back, and Karmic Guide, and I think everyone knows all the Alesha is another commander there that sort of got a lot of hate for that reason because of the Revelark Karmic Guide combo, because a lot of people would do that in that deck. And I'm sure a lot of people who have that deck have run into that issue of people afraid of the combo, so you get targeted even if you don't have it. And for me, this one a little bit less so. This one I did take apart for that reason, but also the fact that it was very similar to a lot of other decks that I had already. So, but you will run into that problem. Again, this is a cautionary tale for all those new players out there that are thinking of making this deck, or any of the decks that I've already talked about or are going to talk about. Be warned, right? This is a warning. There is combos, infinite combos with Safies Daughter, Tyam, Tashar, where even if you think you're playing a very fun, casual deck, your opponents might not think so. They might target you for that reason. Next up is Nimrus, Una's Trickster. 3, a blue and a black, Fairy Knight. 1/6, flash flying. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Again, another commander that, man, I thought this was going to be more popular. It's sort of middling. I think it's a really easy build around. It's doing a lot of stuff that I like. I like playing on my opponent's turn, leaving my mana untapped because I like to be ready for anything. Removal wins games, so I always like to have that removal up, counterspell up. However, and again, just me describing that scenario, I think is a little cringy for a lot of guys, because you think about that and you're like, okay, there's the guy that's going to be sitting there with his mana open, waiting to counterspell my stuff, waiting to, right? So that play style, that very controlling play style, again, leads to everyone just hating on you, and they just are sick of you. Just playing on someone else's turn all the time is something that kind of rubs people the wrong way. And, I sort of didn't love it either. The fact that I was always playing on my opponent's turns. I don't love countering all my opponent's stuff. That's not fun to me. I tend to not run nearly as many counter spells as a lot of people. But this commander lends itself to that strategy. Because you're casting everything on your opponent's turns, you lend yourself to the control strategy. I'm playing lots of counter spells and removal and all that kind of stuff. And it becomes a little unfun to play against. Again, I thought that I would really love playing this commander. I thought it would be great. And maybe this is what a lot of other people, the situation they ran into. And I just felt that I was playing a Dimir control deck that wasn't really fun to play against and really wasn't that fun to play. So I took it apart for that reason. Wasn't expecting that. Next up, Raynor the Ever Watchful. 2 white, blue, Spirit Warrior, Flying Vigilance. The first card you foretell each turn costs 0 to foretell. So right away you think, all right, this guy is a foretell tribal commander. Not really. I think you can do that, but more so, I think you want to build around this last ability, right? Whenever one or more cards are put into exile from your hand, or a spell or ability you control exiles one or more permanents from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token flying. They did change the wording on this ability a little bit. I wasn't aware of this. I was actually told after the fact, actually not that long ago. Someone said, hey, they nerfed that commander. I don't think they nerfed it. It's still really good. And the way I built this deck is I'm just trying to exile things from the battlefield, and I ended up putting, even a Surveyor's Scope, which I'm always trying to figure out how to use that card in decks for some reason. It's not great, but in this deck, even if your opponents do have, the same or less amount of lands than you can still exile their Surveyor's Scope and get a Spirit token. So it's never a dead card. So cards like that, I really went heavy on the exile tribal, whether it be exiling your own stuff or your opponent's stuff. I thought I made a really fun, interesting deck. I was really excited about it. And the people that are regular viewers of my channel will probably know I'm a bit, and you could call it a hipster or an elitist or a whatever. I'm not going to play the popular commanders. But for me, it's not about, it is a little bit. I don't want to ever show up at a table and have someone playing the same commander as me. I just don't think that is very fun or interesting. There was a stretch of time where I would often see 2 Golos decks in a game or 2 Gishath decks in a game. I played a game once that had 3 Gishath decks. So I like to avoid that situation just because I don't think it's fun I want to see 4 different commanders at the table. And if you're playing unpopular commanders, you're going to very much increase the chance that happens. Also, rule number 1 for me with deck building, rule number 1 is don't play popular commanders because they make you a target. Not necessarily popular. I suppose there are some, Raynor is not super powerful. It is a popular commander. It is above the threshold, which I will play. I won't play a commander as popular as Raynor. And unfortunately, Raynor, as I said in my Kaldheim retrospective, is more popular because he is a precon commander. Precon commanders tend to be a lot more popular than they normally would if they were just in a normal set. So he probably, if he had just been in Modern Horizons 2 or something, I don't think he would be nearly as popular as he is. Nevertheless, he is beyond the threshold for which I will play a commander. And again, for the reason that I don't want to see another Raynor deck at a table, and also playing popular commanders, people recognize it. They go, oh, that's that commander. You get into that whole situation. It puts you at a disadvantage right out of the gate, and I don't like that. That's rule number 1 for me when building decks. And I learned that lesson very early. I mean, you don't have to do that. Everyone can do what they like. This is how I build decks. I think that playing a underwhelming, unpopular commander puts you at an advantage right away because everyone's ignoring you and they're not using their removal spells on you and they're not attacking you and they're not targeting you. That's a pretty big advantage in a commander game, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine having a card in play that says, your opponents can't target your permanents and your opponents can't attack you? That's a pretty fantastic card. That's, and I know I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but having a really underwhelming commander sort of artificially creates that situation where no one's paying you any attention, no one's targeting you because, look at that goofy, silly, he's just got a silly, deck that's not very, it's so janky, who cares? And they're going to worry about the guy playing the Muldrotha deck or the Corval deck or whatever. Makes sense to me, doesn't it? So that was a lesson that I learned very quickly in the game. And Which brings me to my final commander today. Narset Enlightened Master. That's right. For the guy that is a huge casual commander and let's build underwhelming decks, the very first deck I ever built in Commander was a Narset Enlightened Master deck. That is right. Very infamous card, but for those who haven't seen it before, 3 white, red, blue, human monk, 3/2, first strike, and hexproof. And the hexproof is really big here. But more so, whenever Narset Enlightened Master attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. And I actually played this card in Modern because I thought that was a really great ability. Even though 6 mana is a lot in Modern, I tried to give it a go. I did make a deck where I'm like, man, I'll just fill my deck with lots of non-creature stuff so that when I exile those top 4 cards, I'm getting like at least 3 that I can then cast. That seems like really great value. It's a value commander. That's the way I see it. I love value. And right around that time, I started playing Commander. That deck didn't work out in Modern. I thought, well, that's a really fun, interesting card, and it's a legendary creature. So now I'm playing Commander. Maybe I'll make a Narset deck. And you know what? Maybe I will make a deck that only has non-creature spells in it. Aha! Aren't I smart, right? I'm such a brilliant deck builder to figure this out. I will put 0 creatures in my Narset deck so that when I attack with it, everything that I exile, I can now play. And that's the deck I made. And guess what? The very first game I played, everyone's like, get 'em, boys. I got piled on, right? And again, this is the very important lesson that I learned early in the day, that if you play a commander like that, you just become the archenemy right at the gate. And, maybe you can push through it. If you have an actual Narset deck, and obviously the way people ended up building Narset decks, I didn't realize this because I hadn't been playing Commander. People were way ahead of me on this one. They are already building Narset decks that took infinite turns and infinite combat steps, and they took it to the most extreme level, which unfortunately happens with a lot of commanders, which is, let's build the most extreme, most powerful version of this commander. And then this commander, Narset's actually a fun, interesting commander that you can do a lot of things with it, right? You can play an artifact or an enchantment tribal, or you could do curses with it. You could do a lot of stuff with a Narset deck, but it got ruined by all of the people who are like, let's just take an infinite amount of turns, an infinite amount of combat steps. And that's super unfun. And so when I show up at a table for the very first time, my very first commander game was with Narset, and needless to say, it wasn't a fun game, right? So again, the video is about decks I took apart for unexpected reasons. I wasn't expecting that because I just didn't know. I wasn't aware. Even if you watch a bunch of games might not even help you, because I did watch a bunch of games. I watched a ton of Commander content online, but none of those people were playing Narset because I was watching casual games and people didn't play Narset in casual games. So I hadn't learned that lesson. That's the kind of lesson you don't learn until you actually show up at a table. Right. So again, this is like a cautionary tale for newer players, where there are those commanders like Narset and combo potential commanders that maybe you're going to run out there and make this really fun deck that you're going to maybe spend a lot of money on. And then as it turns out, oh, now I'm the archenemy every game. That's not fun. You can power through it. And a lot of people do. A lot of people will show up to a casual game with their Narset deck. They know they're going to be the archenemy, and they're going to try to power through it because their deck is really powerful. And they might get there. While we're on the subject, I'll just bring up a game that I played with one of my patrons recently. And, there was a little bit of a misconception, and this doesn't happen. I play a spell table with my patrons on Discord all the time. For anyone who wants to join in on the fun, my Patreon link is in the description below. And a lot of people have come to my Discord for this reason, hey, this guy makes all these fun, interesting decks, and I want to come play my fun, interesting deck. So maybe I'll go join his Patreon, because then I can actually have a fun, casual game, because it's kind of getting hard to find those. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's relevant. And I actually had a patron join recently. He's got an Isamaru deck that he's like, and even on Spell Table, he's like, yeah, I play on Spell Table all the time, and I'm just getting stomped because I have this really casual Isamaru deck that just can't compete with all these high-powered decks. So he came and joined my Patreon. Very first day, he played a Spell Table game with some of my other patrons and had a fun, casual game. And he's like, great, and that's, what I'm hoping for. However, you can get into situations, and we had a little bit of a miscommunication there, where one of my patrons brought his very high-powered Kroxa deck. In fact, I would say it's just a straight-up CEDH Kroxa deck. All the most power, like ad nauseum he had in there. He had a first-turn mana vault. all that kind of stuff. He had the World Gorger combo in there. For anyone who doesn't know how that works, you basically create infinite mana and then cast your Kroxa an infinite amount of times and kill your opponents. It was a miscommunication because one of my other patrons said, I'm bringing my most powerful deck, which was a Scarab God deck, but still a very casual deck. And so he thought, oh, well, I'll bring my most powerful deck. Anyway, the point of this story is the CEDH super powered, I play all the best cards deck was the first person out of the game, okay? Why? Because he made himself a target right out of the gate, I mean, Kroxa can be a casual deck, but first turn Mana Vault, right? And this is what I say all the time. Sure, Mana Vault's a great card, but if you're going to make yourself an archenemy turn 1, is it worth it? Is it worth it to have a first turn Mana Vault if you're going to be the archenemy right out of the gate? I don't think it is. That's, especially in a casual commander game. So already you're in the debate of, are we even playing a casual commander game when someone plays a first turn Mana Vault? A lot of people would say that you're not, right? So that's already up for debate. And I was playing my Tishana deck, which has a lot of answers. All my decks do, but that one in particular. So I knew what he was doing. Right out of the gate, I knew what he was doing. I'm very familiar with CEDH, and I had a Nature's Claim in my hand, and I just left it in my hand. And so when the Animate Dead came down to do the World Gorger combo, I just destroyed his Animate Dead, and that was it. Combo broken up. He wasn't done there. There was more to come. The point I'm getting to here with all of this is rule number 1 for me, and sort of the lesson of the day here is don't make yourself a target, because the payoff isn't worth it for me. And I just talked about this with Cyclonic Rift and cards that I'm starting to take out of my decks. Is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Is it worth it to make yourself the archenemy to play these cards? Is it worth being the archenemy to have a really powerful commander in the command zone that possibly has combo potential, even if you're not doing that? And again, you can work out these wrinkles with Rule 0. I'm playing a Narset deck, like a Narset Curse deck. I think that's a fun, interesting idea, right? And you can say, let people know. And if you have a play group, obviously they will already know. I have a Narset Curse deck. That's fun and interesting. You probably won't be the archenemy, even though that's still pretty, like, Narset's a really powerful commander. Casting a bunch of stuff for free is obviously fantastic. So even if you are playing a Curse deck, that's like I say all the time, there are certain commanders like Najeela, in my opinion, that's just not a casual commander at all. Even if you're just playing fun, goofy warrior tribal, it's just so busted, it doesn't matter. It's just too good. It's just too good to be a casual commander, period. Urza, same thing. Urza, in my opinion, is just too good, too powerful, even if you're playing a janky Construct tribal deck. That's my opinion anyway. So, Cautionary Tale. Is the whole point of this video. So, I guess more for newer players, and for me, and I know for a lot of people, we don't want some newer player going out there, and I'm going to throw together this, what I think is a fun, interesting list that ends up being a, one of those commanders that I'm going to be a target in every game, so I don't have any fun, and it's not fun. Some people like it. Some people like the challenge. They know they're going to be the archenemy. They don't care. But I think a lot of new players, that's not the case, right? I think with a lot of newer players, you want to have a fun, casual game. And if you make Narset your commander, or, maybe Tashar, or maybe Nimrus or something, that might not be the case. So be warned. That is the point I'm trying to get to with this video, I guess. But any decks you guys put together that you're like, oh, I was kind of hoping this would be a fun, I put together a fun, interesting deck, but because of maybe the strategy I was using where I was stealing my opponent's stuff, or maybe the combo potential of my commander, it made it so every game was unfun, so that I had to eventually take the deck apart, or, put it on a shelf somewhere and maybe almost never play it. What deck is that for you guys? Let me know below, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.